You started second-guessing yourself before you had a reason to, not dramatically, not all at once. You just began checking your own memory more carefully, replaying conversations, wondering if your tone had been off, if you'd misread the room, if you were being too sensitive again. Nobody told you to do this. You started on your own. Not because you're fragile, not because your memory is unreliable, not because you lack perceptiveness. You started doing it because something in the environment shifted, and the shift was too subtle to name, too consistent to ignore. This video will not tell you how to stop it. It will not give you a list of signs or a recovery framework. What it will do is describe the exact mechanism operating in that gap, the one between what begins and what you recognize. You didn't miss something obvious. The mechanism was designed to precede your recognition of it. That's not a consolation. That's the architecture. The way gaslighting is usually described, it sounds like a confrontation. Someone tells you that what you remember didn't happen. Someone denies your experience directly, repeatedly, until you believe them. That description is accurate for the late stage. It tells you nothing useful about the beginning. The beginning doesn't look like contradiction. It looks like small adjustments in your own internal narration, a slight softening of your certainty, a recalibration of confidence that feels like growing self-awareness rather than erosion. You believe you're becoming more honest with yourself, more nuanced, less reactive. The technical distinction matters here. There is a difference between genuine epistemic updating, the healthy process of revising your understanding based on new evidence, and induced doubt. One begins with new information. The other begins with systematic pressure on the reliability of your perception itself. Gaslighting, in its early phase, never attacks a specific memory. It attacks the instrument doing the remembering, not what you saw, your capacity to see accurately. The confusion this produces doesn't announce itself. It feels like humility, like maturity, like the reasonable response to someone who keeps pointing out that you might be getting things wrong. In the 1930s, a British psychologist named Frederick Bartlett ran a series of memory experiments that would later become foundational in cognitive science. He wasn't studying gaslighting. He was studying how human beings store and retrieve information. Bartlett discovered something the scientific community was slow to accept. Memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. Every time you retrieve a memory, your brain reassembles it from fragments, filling gaps with inference, expectation, and current emotional context. The implication was significant. A memory retrieved under conditions of self-doubt is not the same memory retrieved under conditions of confidence. The content may be identical. The emotional context of retrieval changes what the brain assembles around it. Bartlett's subjects consistently altered their recollections without realizing it. The alterations were not random. They followed the emotional state present at the moment of retrieval. Here is what Bartlett's original papers documented that almost never appears in the popular version of this research. The brain structures involved in memory retrieval and emotional threat detection share overlapping circuitry. The hippocampus, which handles memory consolidation and retrieval, operates in direct coordination with the amygdala, which processes threat signals. When the amygdala registers a social threat, the possibility of conflict, rejection, or being wrong in front of someone whose approval matters, it activates a threat response loop that alters hippocampal retrieval in real time. This is not metaphor. This is the actual sequence of events inside your skull. The amygdala signals threat. The hippocampus retrieves memory under threat-filtered conditions. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational evaluation, has reduced access to override the process. You are not misremembering. Your retrieval system is operating under conditions that systematically produce uncertainty as output. A person who creates chronic low-level social threat in your environment does not need to contradict a single specific memory. They only need to keep the threat detection circuit active during retrieval. The doubt installs itself. The mechanism does the rest. Think back to when it started, not when you recognized it, but before that. There was probably a period of recalibration. You started explaining yourself more carefully. You started checking whether your emotional responses matched the situation. You started asking, not the other person, yourself, was I too much? Did I exaggerate that? Is this actually a big deal? Think about what those questions felt like when they arrived. They felt like self-awareness, like the honest kind, the kind that people tell you is rare. Think about what environment produced them. Think about whether those questions arrived at roughly the same frequency before that environment existed. Think about who benefited from your uncertainty, not who caused it. That question comes later, and it may never have a clean answer. But who was structurally served by your reduced confidence in your own perception? The questions you were asking yourself, those weren't generated in a vacuum. Here's the hardest part of what this mechanism produces. The doubt was not irrational. It was the correct response to the information your nervous system was receiving. Your threat detection system registered something real. The environment was unstable. Social signals were inconsistent. The amygdala did exactly what it was built to do. It calibrated your behavior towards survival in that specific relational context. Questioning yourself was the brain's attempt to stabilize a situation that kept shifting. The solution was intelligent. For the conditions, the problem is what it costs once the conditions change and the circuit doesn't. Understanding that the doubt was a rational survival output does not turn it off. The architecture that produced it remains installed. The hippocampal retrieval pattern, shaped under conditions of chronic low-level threat, does not update automatically when the threat source is removed. You carry the recalibration. You continue applying it to environments where it no longer fits, not because you choose to, because the system is running the older model. That's the real difficulty. Not that you were manipulated, but that intelligent adaptation becomes its own trap. Here's what Bartlett's data showed that his 1930s colleagues largely dismissed as methodological noise. When subjects retrieved memories in conditions of social evaluation, knowing their answers would be judged, the rate of reconstruction error nearly doubled. Not the errors themselves, the rate. Memory distortion was not primarily a storage problem. It was a retrieval problem, specifically a retrieval under observation problem. The implication for environments of chronic social evaluation is worth sitting with. Every time you retrieved a memory in that relationship, every time you tried to recall what was actually said, what actually happened, you were retrieving it under precisely the conditions that most reliably distort it. The doubt was not a character flaw. The doubt was the mathematically predictable output of a system operating normally under abnormal retrieval conditions. This data rarely appears in popular explanations of why gaslighting works. It's easier to explain it as a power play, a deliberate tactic, a personality disorder in the other person. All of that may be true. It addresses none of the neuroscience of why it lands. Willpower doesn't solve a retrieval architecture problem. The advice to trust your gut assumes your gut is operating in standard conditions. It isn't. Not under chronic social threat. The gut is threat-calibrated. Journaling is frequently recommended. Write things down immediately so you can't be told you misremember. This is not wrong. It is also not sufficient. The distortion doesn't only occur in storage, it occurs in retrieval. You can read your own journal entry and feel uncertain about whether you wrote it accurately. The frame of asking who's the manipulator and who's the victim organizes the social narrative. It does nothing to update a threat-calibrated nervous system that has learned to treat its own perception as suspect. The right question is not, how do I stop being gaslit? It is, under what conditions does my retrieval system stop treating my own perception as a threat signal? That question has a different answer. It points to a different set of conditions. None of them are fast, and none of them look like insight alone. Here's where it lives in daily life. You're in a conversation. Someone says something that lands wrong. Not devastatingly wrong, just slightly off. An inconsistency with what you remember. A tone that contradicts what was said. Your system flags it. Then, in the same second, or close enough that it feels like the same second, the doubt arrives. Did I get that wrong? Not the other person's statement, your registration of it. The flag and the doubt land almost simultaneously. That's the mechanism, not the confrontation, not the dramatic denial. That half second, the flag fires, the threat circuit activates, the doubt overwrites. You don't get to evaluate the original signal. It's already been questioned. By the time you're conscious of the exchange, you're operating on the doubt-filtered version. The original perception is still in there, somewhere below the retrieval layer, intact. You just can't reach it cleanly anymore. What that builds over time is not confusion. Confusion implies an acute state. This is slower. It's a contraction of territory. The range of your own experience you're willing to report as real. Things you used to name, you start leaving unnamed. Not because they didn't happen, because you're no longer confident enough in your perception to defend the claim. Opportunities stop being pursued, not because you decided against them, but because the internal cost of asserting your own judgment became too high. The map gets redrawn, smaller. The edges pulled inward. You keep functioning. You keep operating inside a reduced perimeter. Relationships where you speak more carefully. Situations where you volunteer less. Conversations where you leave your actual position unstated because stating it requires a confidence in your own perception that no longer feels reliable. Stability, purchased at the cost of range. Here is the last implication that almost never makes it into the public conversation on this mechanism. The threat-calibrated retrieval pattern does not require the original threat source to remain present. Once the hippocampal amygdala retrieval loop is tuned to expect social evaluation during perception, it begins anticipating it. The nervous system starts treating new environments as if they carry the same instability as the one that shaped it. You find yourself second-guessing perception in contexts that carry no objective threat. The system generalized. That is what nervous systems do. They build predictive models from high-signal environments and apply them forward. The path back to uncalibrated retrieval exists. It is slow, non-linear, incompatible with insight timelines. Understanding the mechanism does not update it. The system changes through sustained conditions of low-threat retrieval over enough time that the predictive model receives contradicting data. Not a revelation, a long, quiet accumulation of evidence that it is safe to perceive. That's the honest version of the path. Nothing about it is fast. You started second-guessing yourself before you knew what was happening. That's still true. Nothing in this description changes it. What changes is the frame, not to make it more bearable. To make it more precise, the instrument was compromised before you knew it was being used. The doubt was not yours. It was installed. It runs like yours now. That distinction doesn't fix anything. It names the thing accurately. The nervous system that learns to distrust its own perception doesn't stop there. It extends that distrust into something specific, the capacity to evaluate intensity, to read a signal and know whether it is real or performed. The next mechanism is adjacent to this one. It operates at the beginning of relationships, not the middle. It explains why threat arrives wearing the exact signal your brain is most wired to accept as safe. Watch the next video.